Dear students, today we are going to continue our cardinal utility approach. Last day we discussed the concept of utility, marginal utility, and total utility. Then we discussed what is cardinal utility, what does it mean, and what are the basic assumptions based on which and the total cardinal utility approach explain all its consumer behavior. So continuing the last class, today we are going to start one of the eminent law under cardinal utility approach, and that is the law of diminishing marginal utility. So let us have a look on that. So law of diminishing marginal utility, it has been propounded by the eminent British economist Alfred Marshall. So Alfred Marshall, he has developed the law of diminishing marginal utility. And what does it mean? Law of diminishing marginal utility, it states that the additional utility gained from an increase in consumption decreases with each subsequent increase in the level of consumption. That is, the marginal utility is the change in total utility due to 1 unit change in the level of consumption, and the law of diminishing marginal utility states the marginal utility gradually decreases with the level of consumption. That is, when the consumer he is having the subsequent or successive units of consumption, then from additional units of consumption his marginal utility gradually diminishes. So when you are going to consume the commodity one after another, that is the same commodity, and the units of the same commodity, you are consuming the same commodity, and you are taking the units one after the another, then your additional utility or marginal utility that you are deriving from each extra unit of your commodity, that gradually diminishes. Naturally, suppose if you are feeling thirsty, then you will try to intake some water. Then if you are taking the first glass of water, and then the satisfactions that you derive from that glass of water, it will be diminishing when you are taking the second glass of water instantly. And your utility derived from the third glass of water, it will again decrease relative to your second and first glass of water. So that the law exactly is, that is, when you are having your subsequent units of consumption, then your additional utility or your marginal utility derived from the additional units of consumption, it will go on diminishing. So if you are consuming, suppose sweat, we are taking the same example that we have taken last day. Suppose you are taking sweat. Now the satisfactions that you derive from the first unit of sweat, that is the first rasagulla, if you derive your satisfactions from the first rasagulla, suppose it is 10, then your utility or satisfaction from the second unit of rasagulla, definitely it will be less than 10. And again your satisfactions or utility from the subsequent units, that is from the third unit or fourth unit or fifth unit of rasagulla, your satisfactions or utility, it will be gradually diminishing. So that is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now there are certain assumptions based on which this law have been developed. What are these assumptions? So we are having certain restrictions. These are the assumptions. First of all, it is the cardinal measurement of utility, and we have discussed last day that your utility, that your satisfactions that you derive from the units of consumption, it can be measured by assigning numerical number like 1, 2, 3, etc. Then the second assumption of this law is that the homogeneous units, that is the units of consumption that should be identical or that should be homogeneous in size, in taste, in color, in flavor, in every respect, that should be same. That is, if you are taking suppose you are consuming rasagulla, first unit of your consumption is rasagulla, then second unit of your consumption should also be rasagulla, and it should have the same size, same taste, same color, same flavor. If you are taking first time you are taking the rasagulla, and second time you are consuming suppose samosa, then your utility from samosa, it may increase. So your units of consumption should be identical, or it should be homogeneous, so that this law can be operative. So the different units of a commodity that are the consumer is consuming, that should be identical in every respect. Then standard units of consumption, that is the consumer, when he is going to consume the units of commodity, then it should have some standard size. What does it mean? That is, suppose the units of consumption consists of standard units. If a man is thirsty, if a person he is feeling thirsty, and then the water should be given in units of a glass. That is, if you are feeling thirsty, then you should take a glass of water at least. If you are consuming a drop of water, then your satisfactions from the second drop water, it will be definitely more than the first drop of water. So if you are taking the units of consumption, and that should be in standard size. If it is not having the standard size, then your law of diminishing marginal utility, it will not works. So that your units of consumption, that should be identical, that should have a standard size, then and then your law will be operative. Then continuous consumption, that is, your consumption process should be continuous. It is not that if you are taking a rasagulla at the morning and you are taking another rasagulla at the evening or at night, then this law will not be operative, because when you are taking the rasagulla at morning, suppose you are getting your satisfaction is 10, and at the evening if you are taking the second unit of rasagulla, it may happen that your unit your satisfactions or utility derived from the second unit of rasagulla that you are consuming at evening, that may be more than 10, it will be 15 or 20. That is your law of diminishing marginal utility, that is not working there. So it should be, your consumption process should be continuous. Instantly you should have your every units of your consumption. So there is a continuous consumption of units, that is, there should not be any time gap in your consumption process. So that is your continuous consumption assumption. Then this law is not applicable to prestigious goods. Prestigious goods like gold, cash, etc., where a greater quantity may increase your satisfactions or utility more. So in such type of prestigious goods, this law will not be operative. Then no change in tastes and preferences. Consumer should continue with its same units of tastes and preferences. So your taste and preference of consumer should remain same during the period of consumption. So there should not there will not be any alteration in your taste and preference of the consumer, otherwise this law will not be operative. And your another assumption is that income and prices given, that is, the income of the consumer and prices of the commodity should remain same during the period of consumption. There should not be any change in the income and prices of the goods. And lastly, constant marginal utility of money, that is, the utility derived from money, that should remain same irrespective of the level of income. So if your income is gradually increasing, then your utility derived from the unit of money, that should remain same. So these are the assumptions under cardinal utility when we are discussing the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now let us have some little bit explanation with our diagram and with our schedule. So here in schedule you can see here the units of consumption that commodity is taken is apple. Now suppose when you are taking this is your units of apple. Now when your consumer is consuming the first unit of apple, then the utility in cardinal form, the utility derived from the first unit of apple is suppose 20, and your marginal utility is here, or it is also 20. Now when the consumer instantly he is consuming the second unit of apple, then from the second unit his marginal utility is now 16. his marginal utility is now 16. From the first unit he derived satisfaction of 20, but due to the operation of law of diminishing marginal utility, now his utility for satisfactions from the second unit of apple, now it is 16, and from third unit now it is 10. So it is gradually decreasing. So when you are looking into the total utility level, total utility is gradually increasing but at a diminishing rate. It is increasing at a diminishing rate. So when the units of consumption when the units of consumption reaches the fifth unit, then at the fifth unit your total utility now become 50 and your marginal utility now it reaches the saturation level, that is it is now 0. That is, from the fifth unit of your consumption of apple you are not having any satisfaction. So when you are taking the first unit of apple, your satisfaction derive is 20. Now from the second unit that have been decreased to 16, then for the third unit it decreased to 10. Gradually your satisfaction from each additional units of apple, that is gradually decreasing, and at the fifth level of your consumption, now your satisfactions that become 0. That is, from the fifth unit of apple the consumer is not attaining any level of satisfactions, that he is not attaining any level of utility. And if you increase your consumption further to the sixth unit, now for the sixth unit of your consumption the consumer is not having any utility, rather he is now attaining disutility. That's why it is given now it is -6. So that minus, that is the indication of disutility, dissatisfaction. So the law states that when the consumer is consuming the successive units of the consumption of the commodity, now total utility increases but at a diminishing rate, and the marginal utility is now gradually diminishing. Why it happens? This is because of the fact that with an increase in the consumption of apples, his desire to consume more apples falls. So when you are consuming the first apple, then your satisfaction, that is you are now having more desire to consume apple, so your at that time your satisfaction level that you derive from the first unit, it is very high. Now gradually when you are consuming the subsequent units of apple, then your desire for consuming more apples, that is gradually falling. So due to that your law of diminishing marginal utility states that for the each successive units of your level of consumption, your marginal utility gradually diminishes. So when marginal utility becomes 0, then your total utility reaches the maximum, that is the 50. Now when your marginal utility becomes negative, then your total utility falls. Now if you plot all this point graphically, then in diagram we can see our first point is point A. That point A, that is at first unit of your consumption, the consumer is deriving this satisfaction, that is 20. Now for the second unit of consumption, now the consumer is deriving satisfaction less than 20, now it is 16. So this is the point B. So in that way, when you are increasing your level of consumption from 3, 4 and to 5, so at the fifth unit of your consumption, the consumer is not attaining any level of satisfaction from the fifth unit. So here the marginal utility derived from the fifth unit, that is 0. So this is the point of saturation. So if you increase your level of consumption further, then you can see for the sixth unit of your consumption, now you are having your negative utility. So if you now join all the points A, B, C, D, E, F, then you are getting your marginal utility curve, and that marginal utility shows that, that curve shows that your marginal utility gradually diminishes when you are increasing your units of consumption from first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th and 6th. So for subsequent units of your consumption, your marginal utility, that is gradually diminishing. So graphically, that is also we can see that marginal utility curve slopes downwards, indicating decrease in satisfactions or utility with each successive units of consumption. Now this is the law. Now there are certain limitations. What are these? So these are the limitations. There is unrealistic assumptions. This theory is based on unrealistic assumption, that is homogeneity of the commodity, continuity in consumption, and constancy condition, that is your taste and preference, income and prices of the consumer, that should remain same. These are all unrealistic assumptions. Then constant marginal utility of money, there is another limitations. It assumes that marginal utility of money remains constant, which is unrealistic. So there is also a gradual decline in the marginal utility of money in real life situation. So marginal utility of money, that does not remain same in real life situation when your level of income increases. So we cannot stand on that assumption, that is constant marginal utility of money. So there is another limitations of this theory. Now inapplicability to certain goods. So it implies that the law of diminishing marginal utility cannot be applied to goods such as televisions or refrigerators. This is because the consumption of these goods is not continuous in nature. So our law is based on the continuity of consumption. So as there is discontinuity in watching television, in using a refrigerator, so so for such type of commodities this law is not applicable. No change in tastes, this is another assumption, so that should also be the limitation of this law. There should be no change in the tastes, habits, customs, fashions, income of the consumer. A change in any one of them will increase your level of utility rather than the diminishing utility. Then constant prices. Prices of the different units and of the substitutes of the commodity should remain same. That is the assumptions of this law of diminishing marginal utility, but in real life situation that should be the limitation, because prices of the commodity, that always changes, that keeps on changing, not only of the same goods but also the substitute commodities. So this law is based on the assumption that the prices of the commodity, that should remain same, income of the consumer should remain same. So these assumptions are unrealistic. So based on these unrealistic assumptions, we can say that this law may not be operative in real life situation if certain conditions are violated. So thank you friends. For today we shall close our discussion here. So today we discussed what is the law of diminishing marginal utility, what are the assumptions of this law, then we have explained through graphical and tabular form, and lastly we have discussed what are the limitations of this law. So